Hi, this is Andre Koen. I want to say welcome back to another unit for everybody in. This time we're going to talk about addressing systemic racism. And one of the things that's important to kind of recognize about this idea of systemic racism is that we don't necessarily have to individually participate because some of these things have kind of been set into systems so they run almost automatically on autopilot. But what we do know is that any system that human beings have created, we can recreate. And so the question really isn't why do things work the way they do or why do they not, but actually what's the purpose? And so if we look at the results, then it becomes very clear what that purpose might have been. So we can deconstruct that and create something that works for us. Systemic racism is an embedded form of racism within a society or an organization. And so we recognize that we all can succumb to this systemic racism. And we'll give some real practical examples of that. So the first thing that I'd like for you to kind of think about in terms of addressing systemic racism is to really look at racism as the root. And not necessarily the person, right? So we can look at history, we can look at statistics, we can look at data that suggests that racism historically has been systemic, and that there are things today that are impacting us based on those historical points of view. But it is not helpful to place the blame solely on individuals or in some cases groups, right? To really undermine that, we have to build strong coalitions across a variety of differences. And so recognizing history for what it is that and not placing blame on any one individual can actually lead us to build stronger coalitions as we seek to change systemic racism. We also have to acknowledge that there have been some of these historic factors have really played into our understanding and the impact of racism in our current context. And so the when we look at history, we look at Native American or American Indian boarding schools that were really instituted under the Andrew Jackson administration. When we think about the Chinese Exclusion Acts, when we think about the 64 Civil Rights Act, the 1863 Emancipation of African slaves, right, American slaves, it becomes important to recognize those historical factors because they play a role in what we see today. Next is actually commit to learning more. So not only is it important to recognize that these historical things happen, but actually learn more about them so that we can understand what's going on currently, so we can actually change the trajectory of many of the systems that are in operation today. And then lastly, we really want to think about how do you anticipate conversations around systemic racism? How do you anticipate racism in systems, right? So part of it is recognizing some of the fallacies of meritocracy, and that means that you achieve so you deserve, or you deserve so you achieve, however that spiral goes, and recognizing that there are some pitfalls within our systems that prevent people from gaining access. A quick example: sometimes people talk about people being the right fit for a job. Well, how do I get a degree in fit? Right? What are the standards of fit? Or you'll hear people say, well, that person just didn't have executive presence. Well, was that on the job description? So how do we measure that? And so sometimes our systems can even have some bias in the systems. And so we have to prepare ourselves to be ready to confront those. And then lastly, you have to raise your awareness. And so many times people will say, well, I didn't see that systemic racism or that systemic bias. And partly that is because it wants to go unexamined, right? Or we don't see it because we're a part of it. And so it's important to raise our awareness as well as the awareness of others so that we can address systemic racism head on. And then lastly, this is really about building skills. This is not about fault, guilt, or blame, but we really want to help you develop skills so that you can address systemic racism in ways that really matter. So, with that, I want to say thank you so much for joining us for this overview of of everybody in today, and we look forward to seeing who you become. My name is Andre Koen, and I'll see you around.